Roman historical institutes are collegiate bodies established at Rome for the purpose of historical research, mostly in the Vatican archives. These have been set both by ecclesiastical authority and by national governments. Opening of the Vatican archives. In the 15th and 16th centuries, the awakening critical investigation of the past led some scholars to resort to the treasures of the papal archives. The most far-reaching and efficient use of the archives for historical purposes began with Caesar Baronius, through his work, and in the several continuations of it by others. The world first learned of the wealth of historical documents contained in the Roman archives, and especially in the archives of the Vatican. The extensive bullaria, or compilations of papal decrees general and particular, are drawn in part from the archives of the recipients, have only reached their imposing array of volumes because the Vatican furnished abundant material. In the 17th and 18th centuries, ecclesiastical historians and the writers of the numerous monographs concerning local churches, monasteries, ecclesiastical institutions, etc., were aided by the officials of the archives, themselves often scholarly investigators. In this respect, the papal archivist Augustin Thiner accomplished far-reaching work when he published, in many folio volumes, a multitude of documents relative to the ecclesiastical and civil history of northern, eastern, and southern Europe. Also a documentary treatise in 3 folio volumes on the temporal dominion of the Pope and its administration. In the same period, i.e., from about 1850 to 1875, several other investigators, chiefly German and Austrian, in one way or another secured admittance to the papal archives. These events and other influences increased the desire of all scholars for the opening of this valuable repository of important historical documents. Although under Pope Pius IX it became somewhat easier to obtain a permit for private research, the political conditions of his reign worked against a general opening of the Vatican archives. "We have nothing to fear from the publication of documents," exclaimed Pope Leo XIII, when on the 20th of June 1879, he appointed the ecclesiastical historian, Joseph Jean Rather, Cardinal Archivist of the Holy Roman Church. He opened to students the archives of the Vatican, more especially what are known as the secret archives. Despite strong opposition from several quarters, it took until the beginning of 1881 to arrange all preliminaries, including the preparation of suitable quarters for the work, after which date the barriers were removed which, until then, with a few exceptions, had shut out investigators. The use of these treasures was at length regularized by a papal decree of the 1st of May 1884. In the meantime, the Pope had addressed to the 3 cardinals, Petre, de Luca, and Jean Rather, his letter on historical studies. Research in the secret archives. Hitherto very little was known of the contents of this vast treasury. Now its great wealth came to be widely appreciated. Briefs, bulls, petitions, department records, reports of nuncios and other reports, diaries, documentary collections, privileges, legal titles of the most miscellaneous kind, etc. Progress was at first rather slow, for no systematic use of the archives could be planned until the workers had familiarized themselves with the material at hand. The hasty treatment that, in the beginning, the 13th century material received, revealed how much there was to learn before the archives could be used to the best advantage. Gradually, order was introduced in all kinds of research work, in which task notable services were rendered by the historical institutes which were established in close relation to the Vatican archives. Research work in these archives may be divided into individual and collective, or general and special. Individual researches are made by individuals individual scholars, while collective work is conducted by several who have either united for that purpose, or belong permanently to some association. General research devotes itself to the larger outlines of ecclesiastical history, while special research seeks the solution of particular problems, more or less far-reaching in importance. Both methods may be combined, objectively and subjectively. An individual investigator may work at a general theme, while an association may take up the study of a restricted or specific problem, and vice versa. The results of Vatican historical study are to be found in periodicals, essays, and books, also disseminated in large historical collections devoted to other classes of historical material, and containing the results of other investigations, e.g. the Monumenta Germaniae Historica, a study of the published material, exhibits long series of original documents, narratives based on copious documentary material, and occasionally narratives based on information obtained in the archives, but unaccompanied by the documents or by reference to them. Fields of investigation. While it is but natural that the study of documents should be chiefly done in the Vatican archives, most investigators also carry on work in the important collection of printed books known as the Vatican Library. In October 1892, there was opened in connection with the archives and the library a consultation library, the Bibliotheca Leoniana, in order to facilitate research, historical and biblical. Governments, academies, libraries, archives, and corporations contributed to it, and it has already reached very large proportions. The archives themselves are so organized that nearly every student of history may discover something of special importance in his own province. The numerous other archives and manuscript collections of Rome are also open, as a rule, to the student. Indeed, few workers limit themselves exclusively to Vatican materials. Moreover, studies begun in the Vatican are often supplemented by scientific excursions to other Italian cities, either on the student's homeward journey or during some vacation period. Such excursions have at times resulted in surprising discoveries. An exhaustive examination of Italian archives and libraries leads occasionally to a larger view of the subject than was originally intended by the investigator, for whom in this way new questions of importance spring up, the definite solution of which becomes highly desirable. Experience, therefore, and the detailed study of the numerous repertories, indexes, and inventories of manuscripts have made it necessary to organize permanently the scientific historical researches carried on in the interest of any given country. This means a saving of money and of labor. In this way also more substantial achievements can be hoped for than from purely individual research. Consequently, institutes for historical research were soon founded in Rome, somewhat on the plan of the earlier archaeological societies. While the opening of such institutes is a nobile axiom of any government, private associations have made serious sacrifices in the same direction and sustained with success the institutes they have called into life. The state institutes investigate all that pertains to national relations or intercourse with the Curia, with Rome, or, for that matter, with Italy. Many of these institutes do not attempt to go further, and the field is certainly comprehensive and in itself admirable. Others devote themselves to similar researches, but do not neglect general questions of interest to universal history, profane or ecclesiastical, or to the history of medieval culture. Of course, only the larger institutes, with many workers at their disposal, can satisfactorily undertake problems of this nature. Historical institutes. England. At the end of 1876, the Rev. Joseph Stevenson, who was employed by the English Public Record Office to obtain transcripts of documents of historical importance, importance in the Vatican archives, resigned his appointment, and Sir Thomas Hardy, on Cardinal Manning's recommendation, appointed William Henry Bliss as his successor. For years Stevenson and Bliss conducted the research as alone. Later other English investigators were detailed to Rome to cooperate with Bliss and hasten the progress of his work. Bliss died very suddenly of pneumonia. English investigators continued the work, under direction of the Record Office. 5 volumes of calendars of entries in the papal registers relating to Great Britain and Ireland by Bliss and collaborators were published. In addition to the medieval material, numerous extracts and transcripts of a political nature were made from 16th and 17th century documents, transmitted to the Record Office and partly used in the calendars of state papers. France. The École Française de Rome, originally one with that of Athens, employs almost constantly historical investigators at the Grande Archivio of Naples. They devote themselves to the documents of the Angevin dynasty. This institute has an organ of its own, the Mélanges d'archéologie et d'histoire, in whose pages are found not only historical studies properly so called, but also papers on the history of archaeology and of art. The institute has its home in the Palazzo Farnese, where its director lives, and where a rich library is housed. It was founded in 1873, and during the reign of Pius IX, long before the opening of the secret archives, inaugurated its great achievement, the editing of the papal register of the 13th century. Scholars of international reputation have figured among its directors, including Louis Duchesne. The Bibliothèque des Écoles Françaises d'Athènes et de Rome is made up of lengthy monographs by pupils of the École, treating of diverse subjects connected with their studies in the Vatican archives and library. The papal register of the 13th century, the Liber Pontificalis, and the Liber Centrum, form a second series of historical publications to the credit of the French school. A third series is made up of documents selected from the 14th century papal register, and is entitled Lettres des Papes d'Avignon chez Rapport de France. The slow progress of so many learned enterprises is a matter of general regret, nor can one always approve the methods employed, though no one can deny the very great utility of these scholarly studies and researches for the history of the papacy and its international relations. The chaplains of the French National Institute of St. Louis des Français have recently undertaken a work closely related to that of the École Française. The publication in concise register-like form of all letters of the Avignon popes. Gratifying progress is being made with the register of John XXII. The review known as the Annales de St. Louis des Français, whose contributions to ecclesiastical history were noteworthy, has been discontinued. Other works of a learned historical nature have been published by the chaplains of this institute, the results of the diligent researchers in the Vatican archives. German Catholic Institutes. The chaplains of the German National Institute of Santa Maria di Campo Santo Teutonico were among the first to profit by the opening of the secret archives for the conduct of scientific research in the field of German ecclesiastical history. Monsignor de Waal, director of the institute, founded the Römische Kulturschrift für Archäologie und Kirchengeschichte as a center for historical research more modest and limited in scope, and it fulfills this purpose in a creditable manner. To the students of history at the Campo Santo is owing the founding, at Rome, of the Gauss Society Historical Institute. This institute, established after long hesitation, sufficiently explained by the slender resources of the society, is now a credit to its founders. In 1900 a new department was added and placed under the guidance of Monsignor Wilpert, for the study of Christian archaeology and the history of Christian art. The Roman labors of the Gauss Society Institute deal chiefly with nunciature reports, the administration records of the Curia since 1300, and the Acts of the Council of Trent. Other publications, more or less broad in scope, are published regularly in the Historisches Jahrbuch, among its Quellen und Forschungen, or in other organs of the Gauss Society. The 12 volumes in which this institute proposes to edit exhaustively the Acts and Records of the Council of Trent represented one of the most difficult tasks which could be set before a body of workers in the Vatican archives. The aforesaid investigation of medieval papal administration and financial records, which the Institute investigates in cooperation with the Austrian Leo Society, open up a chief source of information for the history of the Curia in the 14th and 15th centuries. The results accomplished by this purely private association surpass greatly those of many governmental institutes. The Gauss Society Institute maintains at Rome no library of its own, but aids efficiently in the growth of the fine library at the Campo Santo Teutonico, near the Vatican. The Leo Society supports at Rome a trained investigator, who devotes his time to publications from the papal treasury, records of the later Middle Ages. The present director of the Gauss Society Institute is Professor Dr. Stefan Heed, Austria. The Austrian Institute, established by Theodor von Sickle and then directed by Ludwig von Pastor, was set up in 1883. It cooperated in the publication of the nunciature reports, and contemplates the publication of the correspondence of the legates and the ambassadors at the Council of Trent. Among the publications of this institute are Sickle's study on the Privilegium Ottonianum, his edition of the Liber Diurnus, and his Römische Berichte. Studies by this institute appeared in the Mitteilung and des Österreichischen Instituts für Geschichtsforschung, dealing with the work of the medieval papal chancery, while Ottenthal's Chancery Rules and Tangel's Chancery Regulations are standard works on the Middle Ages. Numerous historical commissions were sent from Bohemia to Rome. Prussia. A short history of the founding of the Prussian Historical Institute was published by Friedensberg. The project dated back to 1883, but it was not until May 1888 that Konrad Schottmüller succeeded in opening a Prussian historical bureau that began modestly enough, but soon developed into the actual Prussian Institute, reorganized on a materially enlarged scale, and now the most important of all historical institutes at Rome, owing largely to the efforts of its present director, Professor Kerr. In addition to the general work of historical investigations, special departments are conducted for the history of art and for patristic and biblical research. Besides its own publication, Quellen und Forschungen aus italienischen Archiven, the German Historical Institute in Rome today issues a series of German nunciature reports. The library of the Institute, besides extensive monographs on various subjects, has published the useful Repertorium Germanicum and, in cooperation with the Istituto Storico Italiano, the Registrum Chartarum Italia, a series of independent volumes. These researches take in Italian, German, French, English, and Spanish archives. Austria and Switzerland are likewise visited occasionally. The library of the Institute ranks, with that of the Palazzo Farnese, among the best historical libraries in Rome. Hungary. The Hungaricorum Historicorum Collegium Romanum, no longer in existence, owed its inception in 1892 to the efforts of Monsignor Fragnoi, and published under his direction the Monumenta Vaticana Historiam Regni Hungariae Illustratia, whose two series in 10-folio volumes are a lasting tribute to the munificence of Fragnoi. Other noteworthy monographs based on Roman documents and illustrating the history of Hungary must be credited to this institute. Belgium. The Institute Historique Belge Rome was founded in December 1904 and is now located at the Academia Belgica. The Minister of State defined its purpose to be the searching of Italian archives, and especially those of the Vatican, the historical material bearing on Belgium, and the publication of the results obtained. The project included a center for individual Belgian investigators as well as for students assisted by the state, where all might find an adequate library and facilities for securing historical data of every kind. The institute, it is hoped, will eventually become an école des hautes études for the study of ecclesiastical and profane history, classical philology, archaeology, and the history of art. Its first director was Domersma Berlier of the Abbey of Meredsis. His successor is Dr. Gottfried Kurth, Professor Emeritus at the University of Liege. The Institute has published thus far 2 volumes of Anlecta Vaticana Belgica, I. Subjects de Clement V. by Berlier, 2. Lettres de Jean 22, Volume I. by Fayen. The following are in preparation. Lettres de Jean 22, Volume 2, by Fayen. Subjects de Nocent V. by Berlier. Lettres de Benoit 12, by Fierens. By his pamphlet De la création d'une école belge Rome, Professor Corky of Leuven contributed greatly to the founding of the Institute. Netherlands. The Netherlands Institute grew out of various historical commissions, the last of which was established the 20th of May 1904. Its 2 representatives, Dry, Brom and Dr. Orban, were appointed on the 31st of March 1906, director and secretary respectively of the State Institute founded on this date, and of which they thus became the first members. This institute aims at a systematic investigation of Holland's ecclesiastical and political relations, and of her artistic, scientific, and economic relations with Roman Italy during the 14th, 15th, and 16th centuries, a period of very great importance for Holland. A yearly report of the Institute and its library appears at The Hague in Verslagen omtrent Ages und Archiven. Besides a number of essays and minor works, there appeared at The Hague, during 1908, a work by Brom, Archivalia in Italy, Part 1, Rome, Vatican Archive. All historical material in Italian archives bearing on the Netherlands will be concisely described in this series of volumes. The first part contains 2,650 numbers, and is specially valuable because of the excellent conspectus it offers of the contents of the Vatican archives. A work by Orban on Dutch scholars and artists in Rome is ready for the press. Other researches. The institutes above mentioned offer a very incomplete idea of the historical work done in the Vatican archives. Many Frenchmen, Germans, Austrians, Belgians, and others flock to Rome and spend much of their time in private investigations of their own. Most of these workers attach themselves to some institute and profit by its experience. Among Americans we may mention Professor Charles Homer Haskins, who familiarized himself with the treasures contained in the archives and library, and made a report on the same for the American Historical Review, reprinted in the Catholic University Bulletin, Washington, 1897, pp. 177 to 196. Rev. P. Deroux, who labored for several years on the Register of Alexander VI. Hayward, who compiled the Documentus Electori Tabulario Sancti Sedus, Insulas et Eras anno 1492 Repetus et Christophoro Columbo Respicentia, which he published in phototype in 1892. Other American scholars have profited largely by the immemorial academic hospitality of the popes. Special mention should be made here of the studies of Luca Jellic and Conrad Ubel concerning early missionary enterprises, and of an essay by Shipley on the colonization of America. For other valuable information, see the 10th volume of the Records of the American Catholic Historical Society of Philadelphia. The time would seem to be at hand for the foundation of an American Catholic Historical Institute, which would take over the task of collecting and publishing in a systematic way the numerous important documents concerning the American Church, preserved in many places at Rome, particularly in the propaganda archives. Russia has sent historical commissions to Rome repeatedly, and for several years at a time. The names of Schmerlow, Bruckner, Pierling, Forster, Wyszybowski, and others are sufficient reminders of the excellent work accomplished. From Japan came Dr. Murakami, to explore the propaganda and Vatican archives for a history of the Catholic missions to Japan. Denmark is represented among the investigators by such names as Meltisen, Krarup, and Lindbach. Norway by Storm, and Sweden by Tegne, Elif, Carlson, and others. Moritz Stern, Felix Vinet, and others obtained at the Vatican material for a history of the Hebrews. The Spanish government was long officially represented by the famous Spanish historian Ricardo de Hinojosa, while researches in Portuguese history are conducted by Max Winnie. Switzerland entered into this peaceful competition by the labors of Kirsch and Baumgarten in 1899, and since the close of the last century many Swiss have visited Rome for Vatican researches, both as individuals and on official missions. We need only mention the names of Bucci, Wurz, Bernoulli, Stephens, Reinhard, and Stuckelberg. In addition to these and many more names, we must mention the numerous religious who seek in the archives fresh material for general ecclesiastical history, or the history of their order, e.g., the Benedictines and the Bollandists. The writer has observed at work in the archives during the last 21 years Dominicans, Jesuits, Franciscans, minor conventuals, Capuchins, Trinitarians, Cistercians, Benedictines, Basilians, Christian Brothers, Lateran Canons Regular, Valumbrosans, Camaldolus, Olivetans, Sylvestrines, Carthusians, Augustinians, Mercedarians, Barnabites, and others. Women have at times secured temporary admittance, though for intelligible reasons this privilege is now restricted. Since 1879 the archives have welcomed Catholics, Protestants, Hebrews, believers and infidels, Christians and heathens, priests and laymen, men and women, rich and poor, persons of high social standing and plain citizens, of every nation and language. The writer is acquainted with nearly all the great archives of Europe, and knows that none of them afford similar facilities to the historical student or extend him more courtesy. The number of visitors is at all times higher than to other archives, while the freedom allowed in the use of the material is the most far-reaching known. Practically nothing is kept hidden.